Welcome to section 431. We're going to be talking about completing the square, solving quadratics in another method, and also writing in quadratic form. So it's going to be a couple lessons. So first thing we're going to do is factor. Now these following factors are in that perfect square trinomial. It's in the form of a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, which when we factor is the quantity of a plus b squared. A squared minus 2ab plus b squared, which is in the in the form of a minus b squared. So these are what are called perfect square trinomials. So for number one, when we factor this, the first term is a perfect square and the last term is a perfect square. And the middle term is 2 times the square root of 25. So it's going to be x minus 5 squared. Problem number 2. X squared is a perfect square and so is 36. Square root of 36 is 6 and 2 times 6 is 12. So it's in the form of x plus 6 squared. X squared is a perfect square and so is 49. Middle term is 2 times 7. So it's x minus 7 squared. Number 4, 64 is a perfect square and so is x squared. So it's in the form of x plus 8 squared. Number 5, x minus 9 squared. And number 6, x plus 2 squared. Now we're going to see how things will work out to get into that form. And I'll show you an easy way to factor once we get those. For number 7 on, we're going to be solving. Now we're going to be solving using a couple different methods. The most method we're going to use is square roots. So we're going to isolate x squared by adding 15 to both sides. 2x squared equals 80. Divide both sides by 2 and we get x squared equals 40. So we have the x squared isolated. We're going to take the square root of both sides. So x equals, when you solve by square root, you put your plus and your minus. We get 2 solutions. Now the square root of 40 we're going to simplify. It's the square root of 4 times the square root of 10, so 2 square root of 10. So x equals plus or minus 2 times the square root of 10, and that's our answers for that quadratic. Number 8, we're going to divide both sides by negative 9. So we get d squared equals 45. Take the square root of both sides, d equals plus or minus our 2 solutions, and the square root of 45. Square root of 9 times the square root of 5, so it's 3 square root 5. So d equals plus or minus 3 square root of 5. Number 9, isolate the binomial, so we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. 1/2 times the quantity of w minus 2 squared equals 3. And then to get rid of the fraction, multiply both sides by 2. So w minus 2 squared equals 6. Now we take the square root of both sides. So we get we get w minus 2 equals plus or minus. And we can't simplify the square root of 6. So we just leave it as the square root of 6. And then we add 2 to both sides. So w equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 6. And there's our solutions right there. For number 10, we're going to add 40 to both sides. The quantity of x plus 9 squared equals 40. And we're going to take the square root of both sides. So x plus 9 equals plus or minus in the square root of 40. That's the square root of 4 times the square root of 10, so it's 2 square root of 10. Subtract 9 from both sides, so x equals negative 9 plus or minus 2 square root of 10. And there's our 2 solutions. Number 5. Subtract 6 from both sides to isolate. So we have 5 times the quantity of x plus 2 squared equals 80. divide both sides by 5. The quantity of x plus 2 squared equals 16. Now we take the square root of both sides. X plus 2 equals. In the square root of 16, we get plus or minus 4. To isolate the x, we subtract 2 from both sides, so x equals negative 2 plus or minus 4. Now we can clean this up a little bit. So what we're going to do is x equals negative 2 plus 4, and x equals negative 2 minus 4. So x equals negative 2 plus 4 is 2. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. And there's our two solutions. Number 12 is kind of what we're going to be moving into as we go further with this. What we have here on the left-hand side is a nice perfect square trinomial. X squared is a perfect square and 81 is a perfect square. The square root of 81 is 9, and 2 times 9, the middle term, is 18. So it's in our form. So we get x plus 9 squared when we factor that equals 20. So now it's just like the previous problem. So we take the square root of both sides. X plus 9 equals plus or minus, and the square root of 20 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 5, 2 square root of 5. Then we subtract 9 from both sides. X equals negative 9 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5. And there's our two solutions. It's another way for us to solve quadratics, is using square roots. Let's go to the next page and talk about setting up for completing the square. It's going to help us get into these forms. So there's some directions here, and we're going to kind of go over, we'll just do 2 of these for this video, and we'll go over some more in the next video. What we want to do is we want to make sure that our leading coefficient is 1, which it is. Now, we want to get a nice perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side. So I'm going to isolate x squared minus 10x. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. X squared minus 10x, leave some space, equals negative 1. Now we leave that space because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding the middle term, negative 10 divided by 2 squared, to both sides. With algebra, we can do pretty much anything we want to with an equation as long as we do it to both sides of the equation to keep everything in balance. So we end up with is x squared minus 10x, and then negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5, and negative 5 squared is 25. So it's plus 25 equals negative 1 plus 25. Now we have here on the left-hand side is a nice perfect square trinomial. So we're going to get x minus 5 squared equals 24. Now the trick is that number, that negative 5, that comes right from here. Because negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. It's going to give us what that term is in the binomial every single time. So now, just like on the previous page, we take the square root of both sides. So we get x minus 5 equals plus or minus, and the square root of 24, we get the square root of 4, square root of 6. So it's 2 square root of 6. And then add 5 to both sides. So x equals 5 plus or minus 2 square root of 6. And there's our solutions. So it's just helping us get into that form so we can solve by square roots. Once again, for number 14, our leading coefficient is a positive 1. So we're going to isolate the first 2 terms by subtracting 4 from both sides. So we get x squared minus 12x, leave some space, equals negative 4. In that space, we're always going to be adding the middle term, negative 12, in this case, divided by 2 squared. Adding negative 12 divided by 2 squared. So we get x squared minus 12x plus, and negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Squared is a positive 36, and it equals a negative 4 plus 36. So on the left-hand side, we get x, and it's a binomial squared. And you can see what's going to be, because negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. So it's going to be x minus 6 squared. And negative 4 plus 36 is positive 32. Now that it's factored, we take the square root of both sides, so we get x minus 6 equals plus or minus, and the square root of 32 is the square root of 16 times the square root of 2, so it's 4 square root of 2. And then we add 6 to both sides. So x equals 6 plus or minus 4 square root of 2. And there's our answer. Let's do one more completing the square, number 15. Now, unlike the previous two, this one doesn't have a leading coefficient of 1. So to do that, we're going to divide each term by 3 first. So we get x squared plus 12x. I'm going to leave some space equals negative 14. Now, in that space, we're going to be adding the middle term, in this case 12 divided by 2 squared, to both sides. So we get x squared plus 12x, and it's going to be plus 36 equals negative 14 plus 36. So when we factor the left-hand side, we're going to get x and something squared equals 22. Oops, sorry. Yeah, negative 14 plus 36 is 22. So now, that term in the binomial is from right here. It's 12 divided by 2. That's what goes in there. So it's going to be x plus 6 squared. Now, you take the square root of both sides. X plus 6 equals plus or minus, and we can't simplify the square root of 22, so we leave it as the square root of 22. And then just subtract 6 from both sides. X equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 22. And there's our answer. All right, I will see you in the next video. We'll do some more examples, and I'll show you one cool thing that happens when we solve any quadratic, the basic quadratic, using completing the square. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.